দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি চ্যানেল 24 এর নিয়মিত আয়োজন মুখোমুখিতে। মুখোমুখিতে প্রতি পর্বে আমাদের সাথে একজন দেশি কিংবা বিদেশি অতিথি থাকে, আমরা কথা বলি সে অতিথির সাথে। আজকে আমাদের সাথে আছে ঢাকায় জাতিসংঘের আবাসিক প্রতিনিধি কোয়েন লুইস। ওয়েলকাম টু দ্য শো। হাউ আর ইউ?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and it's going to be your first appearance on the television.
That's right, in Bangladesh anyway, yes.
And you're excited?
I'm very excited, yes.
Yeah,
really
me
looking
too.
forward.
Let's start the discussion with the recent Rohingya issue, which is one of your prime area of job, and you focus on it. So, what's going on in the border? It's really scary. So, do you think the Myanmar government or any part of the Myanmar trying to push rest of the Rohingyas to the Bangladesh, or it is something else?
You're right, it really is frightening what's happening at the border, and what we do know is that the tensions are escalating between the de facto Myanmar government and the Arakan army in Rakhine, and that's creating a lot of issues, and the ceasefire has broken down. So we are very worried, but right now there's no information that the current government of Myanmar are trying to push Rohingya across the border. It seems that civilians are being caught in the crossfire. We know that a young man was killed in Bangladesh, which was really terrible, and my condolences to his family. 5 other people were injured. There was also more shooting again at the weekend from helicopters, but up until now there really doesn't seem to be any information that this is a concerted effort or an intentional move by the de facto authorities in Myanmar. So we're just trying to really promote the protection of women and children and civilians in Myanmar, and really hope that this fighting will stop soon.
Right. And do you think Myanmar is trying to scare the neighbors, or they put us into a war? What is, I mean, is there any findings, or how do you find their intentions or movement?
Well, again, we know that the Takmadaw and the Arakan armies, the ceasefire has fallen through, but I don't think, again, we have any information that it's more than that. So it seems to be really hostilities between the Arakan army and the Myanmar de facto authorities. I have to say I really, really appreciate the position of the Bangladeshi government, both as an individual but also as the United Nations, calling for calm, calling for discussion, because really that's the right approach in this situation. And hopefully things will calm over the next days, and we really are concerned again about civilians and movement of people inside Rakhine. I know that there has been people displaced from their homes yet again, and there really is a humanitarian issue on the ground.
Right. And in the Human Rights Council, where the hearing is going on, there was a suggestion that no country should sell arms to Myanmar. Interestingly, we have seen one of the Security Council member sold arms. So do you think these behaviors, maybe that's their own personal relationship or bilateral understanding, but these sellings will in a way influence the Myanmar military to become more aggressive on their local people?
I can't really speak to that. I mean, I honestly don't have any knowledge of arms deals being made by other countries, but what I can say is I know that many member states are really pushing within the Security Council to try and address the situation and call for calm. And so that's really what the United Nations would like to see, is things to calm down. So there's discussions going on between member states, and hopefully some of that bilateral negotiation with the de facto authorities in Myanmar will yield some positive results.
Right. So this is something that is really putting pressures on Bangladesh as well, but this will linger the repatriation, right? So do you think the repatriation process that UN and Bangladesh both looking at will take longer time because of this, what's going on in Myanmar?
It's been incredibly difficult, and we're entering into the 6th year of the Rohingya refugees being in Bangladesh, and there's close to 1 million Rohingya living in Cox's Bazar and on Bhasan Char, and you know, there has been incredible solidarity and humanity that has been demonstrated by the people of Bangladesh, by the government, by the Prime Minister, in welcoming all of these people into Bangladesh, and the international community in providing the support. So in parallel, there's been ongoing discussions that have been led by the government of Bangladesh, along with Myanmar authorities, to talk about repatriation. With the ongoing fighting, obviously it makes the situation more unclear. It's not easy to see how it can happen. But what I can say, and again, some of my colleagues visited last week in Bangladesh to talk about the efforts that are being made to find solutions for people in Northern Rakhine, and also to try and keep that discussion alive, and we will continue to work on that. It's our priority. I know it's the government's priority as well, so it might not seem easy right now, but it's obviously key, because not only is it important for people to want to go home, as much as every single Rohingya that I have met has been grateful to the government and to the people of Bangladesh, they've also said they would really like to go home first and foremost. So we really have to support that, and that's really key. And also the funding situation to continue the response is really getting very difficult. Our funding numbers are declining. Next year we're worried about being able to sustain even the support we're providing now, because the international community has been pulled in many directions, including with the war in Ukraine.
Right.
So it's not easy, so that's really the emphasis we all have, is to get people home
And,
in a safe and secure way, obviously.
Right, and you're worried about that.
Yes.
Okay, right, that's obvious. So let's look into something else apart from the Rohingyas. I think there is a hearing going on the enforced disappearance on Geneva, and 21 member states and around 700 cases is there. Bangladesh is one of those. How do you find Bangladesh's position and answer to the suggestions or the questions made by the Human Rights Commissioner in the disappearance hearing?
So there's a working group on enforced disappearances that is in place in Geneva. It's an independent group, so obviously I follow, but it's really not anything within my purview. So there's 81 cases at the moment that are open, and there's a communication with the government of Bangladesh. These are cases that are raised by families of people in Bangladesh. And so that conversation is ongoing at the moment.
So as we are talking about the enforced disappearance, we really we really had a great, I think the trip of Human Rights Commissioner immediate past, in her press briefing, she came up with the idea that independent investigation group can be done in Bangladesh, and government really didn't like, or did it take note on that? So what's your take on that?
So I think you're referring to when the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, was here. She talked about the importance of having an independent human rights commission in Bangladesh. This is a global standard, so it's something that's asked of all countries, because it's seen as a good practice, because it's independent, obviously, but it's also impartial and credible to families, to people who may have concerns that they want to raise. So it's not targeted only at Bangladesh, it's a general comment. So how the government has taken that information or how they reacted, I'm not privy, so that's obviously a decision for them to make. But again, this is a recommendation, and if the government does decide that they want to put in place something that's independent, we're obviously here to help and support that process.
All right. So how these things happen? Because I mean, WGEID, the whole thing, how this procedure takes place? Do they take the complaints individually or as group, and then they do the investigation and then come up with the suggestions? And why is this so important?
So WGEID, so it's a working group on enforced and involuntary disappearances, and it's again an independent body. So they take cases of people who have exhausted all recourse with their own government and appeal to them. It's called a special procedure in United Nations talk. What it basically means is there's a mechanism or a system in place to allow communication between people and the government if people feel that their issues or their concerns of enforced disappearances or involuntary disappearances are not taken into account. So it's The working group looks at the individual cases. There's a group of 5 experts who decide on those cases, again, completely independent, nothing to do with the UN here in Bangladesh. And then the government, there's a dialogue, but there's a time limit. So within 6 months, there has to be a response. So that's the process. I know the government is working hard to respond, and there's a dialogue. I don't really know what the outcome of any of those processes
And do
will
they
be.
say the response is satisfactory or unsatisfactory, or some more progress need to be done? Do they give these
Yes,
suggestions?
they ask for feedback or comments. If not all of the details are there that they would ask
And
for.
do they say case solved?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay, okay. And then they send it to the relative government.
Yes, absolutely. So it's really a dialogue, and cases are kept open if there isn't sufficient evidence or information available. So that's the process. Again, it's very legal, it's very human rights focused. It's not my area of expertise, but in layman's terms, that's a bit how it works.
But there is a very healthy practice of doing the debate, I believe. Yes. So because there are a lot of rumors, there are a lot of criticism on that.
Of course, and I think
that's why I asked you on so many questions to make the audience clear about it. In the briefing, when the Human Rights Commissioner Michelle Bachelet was here, she expressed a concern. She expressed a concern on the pre-election situation. Was the concern was on the basis of anything, or is just it's a regular concern?
Well, unfortunately, we've seen quite a lot of political violence being reported in the media. It's very prevalent in the Bangladeshi media. So I think she picked up on that during her visit. And obviously, as part of our role in the UN, we try and highlight preventative measures and highlight concerns so things don't get worse. And I think as part of her trip here, she wanted to say she's noted this and to put it on the table as something that maybe more support or more focus could be put on the issue of political violence. So without speaking for her, obviously, because she's her own person, it's a really important part of the United Nations to promote peace, to address any type of conflict, and if there's beginnings or inklings of issues that they're raised so that they don't spread further.
Right. If I remember correctly, that UN didn't have a mandate to follow the last election, the immediate last election. But in 2014, we found Mr. Oscar Fernandez Taranco, one of the senior officials from UN. He came up and he was trying to bring all the political party in one table. That didn't happen. But my question is the coming election is on the UN mandate, and how you decide all this? How headquarters decide which election is in the mandate or not?
Okay. So in terms of mandate, I think the question is about observing the elections, right? So the UN, the United Nations in Bangladesh doesn't have a mandate to observe the elections in Bangladesh for the coming elections end of next year. If it's only specific situations where election observers are deployed by the United Nations. They come normally from our office in New York. And it would have to be a decision from the Security Council or the General Assembly, or a country would have to request election observers. So none of those criteria are in place in Bangladesh. So we don't have a role. We don't have a role for the elections.
Till now there is no request from Bangladesh.
No, there's no request.
So if there is no request, it will be not on the mandate.
No, absolutely not. No, there has to be a decision outside of the UN in Bangladesh. It's either, as I said, Security Council, GA, or the government of Bangladesh would have to request it.
Oh, and what if the opposition asks for it?
No, it would have to be the government who asks for it.
Okay, I didn't know about that. It's interesting.
Yes, that's how it works. So it really is something that is very context specific and really requires a negotiation at member states level. It's not really with the UN in a country.
Okay. And as you've seen, a lot of rallies are going on from the opposition and violences as well. So how stable political situation is important for particularly this Bangladesh, which is moving forwards to a certain place, and that can be earned, the stability, political stability, by dialogue or what?
So I think everybody should have ability to participate in elections, right? So whether it's young people or women or various religious groups, so plurality and engagement of everybody in elections is really important. So having open dialogue as much as possible, political parties speaking together as much as possible is ideal, because then there's less risk of violence, there's less risk of issues. So we're really keen to promote any work that we can do to help participation, to help some of that dialogue, and really to call for calm, because it is concerning that more than a year away from elections we're seeing violence. So if there's ways to avoid that, if there's ways to facilitate dialogue, obviously that's very important. But those are really decisions for people in Bangladesh to make, and we're obviously, as the United Nations, here to support, to promote plurality, to promote democracy, but the elections belong to the people here.
Yeah, but you need some call to put some dialogue, otherwise even we'll be normally observing, right?
No, we don't. No, we have no role to observe the elections.
Interesting. It's quite interesting. So we all talked about the election. We talked about what's going on. We talked about Rohingya. Let's look into Bangladesh. How do you find the social inclusion and the scenario here? Do we need to do more, or what are the areas that we really look into deeply?
So social inclusion is very interesting. It really, for me, it means leaving no one behind, right? Making sure that everybody is being taken care of. And there's certain parts of Bangladesh and the work that's being done in this country that are extraordinary. When you look at, I know, COVID vaccinations, for example, 130 million people. It's amazing. That's very inclusive. And the progress in terms of infrastructure, electricity, water is amazing as well. Over 90% of children are getting primary education. So there's huge areas of progress that have been made over the last 20, 30 years that really are astounding. I think the planning as well of the government is very strong. There's lots of push in terms of social protection and really being more inclusive of all people. So there are areas of work that have been defined already by the government where progress is being made. Obviously, it's not perfect, and some work needs to be done in terms of poverty issues. There's obviously the global financial situation, the economic crisis that's impacting Bangladesh and is of a concern. Sometimes when we see also very fast development, there's disparity, meaning the rich are getting rich and some of the social protection areas are not being addressed. So there is more work to be done, so that's obviously a focus of the UN development work in the country. We have a cooperation framework that looks at all of these different areas around social protection, around economic development, around graduation from least developed country, and really trying to support to move some of this inclusion agenda forward. Whether it's on gender is another area. We have an entire pillar on gender issues. And again, reading the newspapers, there's a lot of issues around gender-based violence still. There's issues with child marriage because of the economic situation. So we really
want...
And
the COVID as well.
And the COVID, obviously, of course. So there is a lot of work that still needs to be done, but there's a strong, solid foundation to build on, and I think some of the planning processes are excellent.
And it's a very interesting place compared to other countries, because you've been to Sylhet after the flood.
Yes.
You have seen how horrible and terrible it is. So keeping those unwanted natural disasters in mind, social inclusion is quite a tough job, can be done in Bangladesh, right?
Yes, no, it's really tricky when you're making progress as a country and the development agenda is moving forward, and then you're hit by these incredible natural disasters. It's not just Bangladesh, unfortunately, it's across the world. Climate change is a reality of now, and we saw the floods in Pakistan a few weeks ago. When I was in Sylhet, over 7 million people were impacted. And the scale of it is just extraordinary. So that has a real toll on people, on children and women and elderly people. and then you lose everything, and then you have to rebuild, and then you've lost your home, but you've lost your agricultural inputs, you've lost your animals, and it takes time to rebuild that, but it also takes time and impacts the economy. It has a huge impact. I read recently a statistic about how climate change is impacting countries,
right.
and up to 20% of the gross domestic product can be impacted. So it has an overall negative effect. So the climate change agenda is really top priority in terms of how we adapt to climate change, but also how we mitigate, meaning how do we stop our carbon footprint, how do we try and be a greener economy. Some of those conversations are really, really important, and unfortunately the people in Bangladesh are really taking the brunt of some of these really dramatic climate events.
Right. So we were talking about the climate change, and we have seen only the promised by the giant countries. They haven't disbursed a single dollar for the suffering ones. How UN can make it happen?
So there's various discussions around this, and obviously as part of the COP27, which is this upcoming meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, there's big discussions, and I think you're referring to loss and damages, where countries are asked, industrialized countries and richer countries are asked to pay because the industrialization has impacted climate, and that is impacting countries like Bangladesh. So that's a highly political conversation. It's happening between member states again, and very challenging. And I know Bangladesh is really going to push for loss and damages, to push for this agenda, because obviously the impact is very real on people and on the country. But having said that, it's not that countries are not supporting, right? There is a huge development support to Bangladesh to try and adapt the country to climate. There's also efforts to support, in response to floods. And obviously that's too late. You'd rather that they didn't happen, and you'd rather that people didn't have to go through that. But there is a humanitarian also agenda of the development community here. So that's, I think, very important. But obviously more needs to be done. I think it's been wonderful that Bangladesh has been chair with the Prime Minister of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and now we'll co-chair with Ghana, and really making sure that the voices of countries that are impacted is being heard, and that conversation continues. It's also important that we all take responsibility, because it's for our children, for our kids, it's their future. So, and young people really are, I have to say, amazing. I've been to quite a number of events where Bangladeshi youth have been talking about the upcoming meeting, and have been talking about what it means for them. And they really have extraordinary ideas and wonderful ways of thinking about things. And I think we need to do more ourselves. And they're willing to be the activists, they're willing to be the voice and to make the change. But really just coming with some of these real examples and continuing to advocate for the needs of countries is really, really important. We have to engage in these global processes. They're very important because they're the big decision makers, and they are making some good decisions in terms of the carbon footprint and reducing emissions and the bigger policy issues, and that has been very positive. But inclusive climate action takes all of us to engage.
Right. We are almost at the end of the show, and my last question would be, as Bangladesh is moving to middle income country, what is the most biggest challenge we really need to address now? What's your take or advice on that?
The biggest challenge? For me, middle income country status is incredibly positive. It's a huge achievement. The country is almost there. The development indicators are fabulous. But it's only one step along the way to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And so that growth and that economic development really needs to be done hand in hand and consistently, along with development of the health sector, the education sector. Bangladesh has 2 million graduates every year who need to be given new opportunities, and the fourth industrial revolution is on the way, and how can we make sure that young people are engaged and they're brought into a new type of work, a new type of industry. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in addition to achieving the development goals in terms of graduation to middle income country. And so that really is where I hope the United Nations and Bangladesh can support.
Right. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely a pleasure to have you in the show.
Thank you.
And it was, I believe, you also enjoyed the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
থ্যাংক ইউ। দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছিলাম জাতিসংঘের আবাসিক প্রতিনিধির সাথে। তার পরামর্শ যে এই যে প্রতি বছর প্রায় 20 লাখ করে নতুন মানুষ কাজের ক্ষেত্রে আসছে, তাদেরকে যদি কাজের সাথে ইনভলভ করা যায় তাহলেই যে মধ্যমায়ের দেশের স্বপ্ন দেখছে বাংলাদেশ, সেটি হবে টেকসই নিরাপদ। তো দেখা হবে মুখোমুখির অন্য কোনো পর্বে অন্য কোনো অতিথির সাথে। তার আগ পর্যন্ত সুস্থ থাকুন, নিরাপদ থাকুন এবং আনন্দের সাথে থাকুন।